Thanks, Nikki, for passing on the task for moderating the next session, which will be on food security, international cooperation and soils. And we will have two speakers in our next and last session for about 45 minutes, which is first Natalia Rodríguez from the Global Soil Partnership and Food and Agriculture Organization. He is a soil scientist. She has a PhD in soil scientist. And for the FAO and the Global Soil Partnership, she coordinates the implementation of soil pollution and soil governance activities at the Global Soil Partnership Secretariat, provides technical support on the project cycle, and is the regional facilitator for European and Eurasian soil partnerships. Furthermore, Natalia was the main author and coordinator of the Global Assessment of Soil Pollution Report, a FAO flagship publication prepared collectively by more than experts. So, Natalia, the floor is yours. Looking forward to your presentation. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Harald. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you today and to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about what the FAO and the Global Soil Partnership are we doing regarding soil health in terms of food security. So allow me to share my screen so you can see my presentation. Just please confirm you can see it properly. Okay, great. Perfect. So, well, as Harald said, my name is Natalia Rodríguez, and I'm part of the Global Soil Partnership Secretariat, which is hosted by FAO, and we are based here in Rome. And today I will try to bring to highlight some of the key things or key aspects regarding food security worldwide. So we have to keep in mind that between or almost around 800 million people in the world have faced hunger in 2020, and these numbers have definitely increased in 2021 because of the COVID pandemic. And the situation is not getting any way better because we are now facing the war in Ukraine, which is hampering even more the supplies in agri-food systems and putting food production at risk. According to the latest estimates of FAO, probably the next harvest will be severely affected because of the lack or the lack of fertilizers or the lack of accessibility and affordability of those because of the increase in prices. And since I'm part of the Global Soil Partnership, I have to talk about soils. And why? Because if we do not have soils, we will not have terrestrial life and we will not have food. And we cannot have healthy and nutritious food if we do not enhance soil health. As mentioned before, we are not on track achieving all the Sustainable Development Goals and targets related to nutrition and food accessibility. The current rate in child stunting is insufficient, and when we look at the statistics regarding overweight, wasting anemia, and even obesity, we see that the situation is worsened over year after year. We see that 12% of the global population was severely food insecure in 2020, which has increased almost 12% regarding the values in 2019. And almost 1 in 3 people in the world have no access to adequate food in 2020. But as I said, soil is where food begins. Over 95% of the food that we eat comes from soils. And we need healthy soils to provide healthy and nutritious food. We need to increase food availability to respond to the increasing demands for food and other raw materials as well that are extracted from soils. But for this, we need to increase crop yield in a sustainable way without depleting the already overexploited soils. We also need to improve food quality and food nutritional value. And for this, we need to look at macro, but also at micronutrients present in soils. We were having just an event in FAO this morning regarding the fertilizer supply, the different alternatives for synthetic fertilizers, and what is the role of soils. And there is key, and all the speakers agreed that we really need to enhance soil health and look at soils as a whole system, because we cannot simply supply nutrients directly to the crops without looking at what is happening on the soil. We also need to reduce the environmental impact of the actions, particularly in the agri-food systems. So we need to look for practices that are sustainable and that are environmental friendly, let's say, environmental positive, and that do not have environmental footprint. We also should leverage on the biodiversity that we have in the soils, because they are fundamental both to enhance crop diversity, but also to promote the cycling of the different nutrients in soils. And we also need to look at soils as an ally to mitigate and adapt to climate change. If we enhance soil resilience, we will be able to respond to the different scenarios that climate change is putting in front of us. Whenever, and now this is, everyone is looking at One Health approach, looking at environmental health, human health, and animal health to respond also to other crises. But we really need to consider that soil health has to be part of the, equation, because it's where we humans, but also animals and also the plants, get the nutrients and also get the contaminants if the soil is not in good quality. The same for the water quality. If the soil is contaminated, these contaminants will move into the air, but also into the water. So we really need to think on soil as the media that is in the middle of all those environmental compartments and living organism, and take care of the soil if we want to take care of ourselves. This event is talk about soil policy. So let's look at what is the global overviews. Many of the speakers today have addressed and presented different laws, strategies that have been approved or are being approved in different parts of the world. And this is key, is important, because we see that there is a progress, there is a better recognition of the role of soil for providing food, for providing raw materials, as a potential nature-based solution for climate change and for conserving and protecting biodiversity. But the reality is that soils were neglected until 2010 and were completely out of the global agenda. The Millennium Development Goals that were before the Sustainable Development Goals didn't mention soils at all. And now there is a progress towards considering soil as an important part of the system, and luckily is being considered more. But unfortunately, as you saw this morning, soil is barely considered within the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 4 goals that name soils, but actually when you look at the small letter, where what we are reporting, what we are monitoring, soils are not being considered in the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, because countries are not reporting on soils. So we really need to work to strengthen data availability, information availability, and support countries to include soils into the monitoring and reporting mechanism to ensure that we are valuing, taking care and protecting this very essential natural resource. So what is the role of the Global Soil Partnership in all this? So we work, we were created, the Global Soil Partnership was created as a voluntary mechanism to develop single strong voice on soil issues and to improve collaboration between all stakeholders. Being hosted by FAO gives us an advantage, a strategic advantage, because we have governments, direct contact with governments, but we also work very closely with academia, and we have also a very strong relationship with private sector and farmers, who are at the end are the key stakeholders that are placing the ground and managing our soils. It is a unique forum for exchanging experiences and building capacities, relying on the capacities and technologies that others have. And we have both public and private donors that support the actions of the GSP. One of the key things I want to highlight in this slide is that the huge number of experts that are part of the different networks. We have currently 7 technical networks, and we now count with the support of over 10,000 experts, farmers, soil laboratory staff that work together to advance the work on soils at the global level. So the Global Soil Partnership has produced several key tools and products, so knowledge tool, normative tools, and also data and information products that will support informed decision making. We have been this morning at this event in FAO discussing the code of conduct for the sustainable use and management of fertilizers. There were several ministries, particularly from African countries, and they highlighted how important this code is for them, but that there is still a lot of work to do before they can really introduce the principles, both of the voluntary guidelines on sustainable soil management and the principles of the code of conduct for the use and management of fertilizers into national policies. And for this, they really need support to convert and to adapt these very general principles according to the realities and the needs of the different countries. We have also, well, one of our mandates is also to improve and foster the adoption of sustainable soil management. Sustainable soil management includes a very wide range of practices. We do not want to put concrete names or etiquettes to any of the practices, because good practices are normally very site-specific. They depend on the crop varieties, they depend on the climate conditions, the soil types, but also on social and cultural aspects. So we are trying to build this big toolbox with as many different practices as possible and provide them to the farmers so they can then take an informed decision. And for this, we are also trying to develop, or we are already developing, a capacity building program particularly focused on farmers, where we recognize the knowledge that they have, the expertise that they have, so they can share that expertise with other farmers. So the Global Soil Doctors program is a farmer-to-farmer training program. We have also this Rec Soil initiative, is the recarbonization of agricultural soils. Whenever we talk about climate change, now everyone is promoting carbon sequestration in soils, and indeed is one of the most cost-effective solutions to mitigate climate change and to enhance resilience, especially in agri-food systems. But we cannot only look at carbon. It has been demonstrated by science that it goes beyond carbon. We can not only focus on increasing carbon in soils, but we need to look at the system as a whole. So we need to improve biodiversity. We also need to look at nitrogen. So this is what we are trying to do with the Rec Soil. And all this has to be supported by the society. You cannot introduce any change in practices, in consumers' behavior, if they are not aware of the problems and the solutions. And that's why the United Nations adopted the World Soil Day in 2013. So the first one was celebrated in December 2013. This event is celebrated every year and is one of the most successful United Nations official events celebrated worldwide. As you can see, the number of events and countries celebrating it has increased exponentially almost in the last couple of years. And this has to be translated into news because, yeah, it doesn't matter how advanced is the science if we are not able to translate the science into a language that is understandable by everyone. So it's very important to raise awareness and to communicate the importance of soils. And let's talk again about soil legislation. I'm sure you have had very good presentations today, very enlightening presentations. But what we are trying to do in terms of improving soil governance and legislation here in FAO is first understand which the situation is. So for this, we have created the SoilX. It's a digital platform where we have collected, and we are continuously collected all national legislation, regulation, strategies, both binding and non-binding legal instruments that are available at the national and regional level that has a relevance to soil management or soil protection. What we have seen here is that only 17 countries have a systematic national regulation that includes soils or cover all possible soil degradation processes, which is less than 10% of the member countries of FAO. So we are trying to support the countries that do not have any regulation on soils or whose environmental agricultural policies are not strong enough to protect soil, so to ensure the sustainable management of soils and the protection. So what we are trying to do with a specific working group and specific dedicated work is to identify the needs, the pressures, and the solutions to address soil degradation that has to be included in any legislation at national level, even at local level. And we are trying to break silos and address the food systems systematically and holistically. So we will identify key aspects that has to be included, key points, key principles to enhance soil health and to promote sustainable soil management that are to be included in more broad policies and regulation. It's great if we have a soil law that covers all potential land uses, but since soils are a cross-cutting issue because they are used in agriculture, they are important in forestry, they are important in mining, in urban planning. So it's very complicated to have a policy that covers all the different land uses. Instead of that, at the national level, we usually have different policies, and in many cases they are contradictory. So what we are trying to do is to identify the principles that are to be included in all those different legislations to ensure that they are coherent and they ensure the protection of soils. Just for your information, before my last slide, we have recently adopted a new action framework for the GSP, where we want to achieve by 2030 the improvement or maintenance of the health of at least 50% of soils globally. And the idea is that we try to address global challenges like climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation, food insecurity and malnutrition, but also pollution, water scarcity, and any other pressing challenges that affect the humanity nowadays. And for this, we need to work all together. We have to bring all the potential partners and stakeholders to collaborate and achieve the 6 action areas that we have identified. And just to conclude, I want to present the way forward, what we are planning to do now in the future. So we consider that continuing advocating for a good soil governance at the national level is key. So we are trying to find the best ways to foster this advocacy at the national level. For example, we have the successful example of Australia where they have a soil advocate. So let's think about if this is a possible way to, or a mechanism that can be replicated in other countries to ensure that at the governmental level, soils are taken into account. We will also continue raising awareness on the importance of soil, and for this we celebrate every year with a bigger event every year, World Soil Day as the main platform. We will work on the field, on the ground, with farmers to enhance the health of these 50% of the global soils and try to promote soils as a solution, either within the existing conventions or with any other mechanism that is in our hands to enhance the recognition of soils. We will advocate also for increasing the investment, private and public investment on sustainable soil management. And we will continue with the capacity building programs that we have in place. So we make sure that all the countries can advance because they have access to technology, they have access to knowledge, they have access to practices, all at the same path. So just to conclude, I would like to invite to all of you to join the Global Soil Partnership and join our forces and our efforts towards healthy soils. That's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Natalia, and also for your encouraging work on soil in general, soil sustainable soil management, and in particular on soil governance. I think you have done, you and FAO and the Global Soil Partnership have done a very good job in the last year. And your work is very important to achieve a better solutions for soils. We will now have a second presenter. Is he with us, Larissa? Which is my dear colleague, Franzens Tetteh from living in Ghana. He is the vice chair of the African Soil Partnership, meaning that this is a regional branch of the Global Soil Partnership. He is in fact, he is a scientist. He is leading a soil science entity in Ghana, and he has also done a lot of work on methodological issues, scientific issues with regard to soil. Franzens, the floor is yours. We are happy to have you with us.
While we wait for the connection, maybe Carlotta can share some insights from the chat in the meantime.
Yeah, well, there have been deep exchanges regarding the first presentation that we had on the science behind soil governance. But also we have a question from Ila Kamara. And this is about, I'm just going to read the question. Current production and consumption patterns would not promote sustainable soil management. What do you think needs to be done to encourage governments and businesses to overall unsustainable production and consumption patterns across the world? Quite an interesting question.
Natalia, did you understand the question?
Yes, I see it in the chat.
You can answer both in 60 seconds.
Yeah, it's a very good question actually, and yes, for example, now in the crisis that we are facing with the fertilizer crisis, let's say, there are many voices that are trying to go back to unsustainable practices. Let's put more fertilizer, even if we don't have them. Let's put it. The only way to combat that, to make changes in consumption and production patterns, is to educate, to raise awareness, to show alternatives, and to show it with data. So we always need to have science that back up your decisions, your suggestions. So I think this is the only way we have to advance. Continue with advocacy, continue with awareness raising, and try to mobilize investment, which is exactly what we are trying to do with RecSoil, for example. Mobilize investment to apply sustainable soil management practices to demonstrate that a change and a different mechanism, a different way of producing is possible. This is the only way we can do it. And I see that many governments are also changing their minds because they have realized that we cannot continue in the same way as we have done in the last decades, let's say, because they are losing the natural resources in their countries. They are polluting, or they are losing the soil because of erosion. So they are also trying to move towards more sustainable agri-food systems.
Many thanks. We try to come back to Franzens. Franzens, can you speak? Can we hear you? we can't. Maybe I can pose a question to Natalia, also to Karl, because you can somewhat share the panel with Natalia. I have actually two questions, which is also a question which came to my mind listening to the presenters of the last panel. The question is, do we not need more clear requirements, legal standards for consumption pattern? For example, the meat consumption of people. Do we need, nowadays, this is just in a free choice and discretion of people whether they eat meat, to which extent they eat meat, and whatsoever. But this has a very clear relationship to the degradation of soils. Do we need more stringent requirements on consumption? Is my first question. And second question is, Natalia, you said that there's no international reporting requirement on soils with regard to SDGs and probably to the other international regimes. This morning, Dirk Messner said, for climate politics would have not been that successful without clear targets and objectives. So my question is my second question, do we need targets for sustainable soil management at an international level and reporting obligations in order to make the political activities at national level more transparent, more accountable, more interrelated to the international cooperation activities? So who goes first? I have to pose two questions. Thanks. Now you spoke so much, so I give the first. You have the first choice.
Thank you very much. I see Franzens has joined us.
Yeah.
Franzens, good afternoon to Accra, Ghana. How are you?
We cannot hear you.
You must unmute yourself. We cannot.
But Oliver, answer my question as long as Franzens is not available.
Okay, I will try to answer the question regarding the targets. I think you will remember from COP26 in Glasgow, the slogan was, any target without a plan remains a wish. And I think that we can translate into the SDG 13 implementation of targets regarding soil, LDN, land and land neutrality and soil degradation. I think we do need clear targets. It's probably not so easy to implement and to design those targets, and a lot of consultation, I suppose, will need to be conducted. Natalia is nodding. She's already busy starting the process, but it may take a while. We heard this earlier today, 400,000 farms in a country like Germany only. So if we translate this into a global context, and FOIO, I'm sure, has the figures, how many farms, and I'm not speaking small scale holders in Africa and Asia, but how many major farms do we have around the world that would then perhaps have to implement those targets? I don't know, but definitely I think that slogan from Glasgow makes very good sense, because any target without a plan remains a wish. And it's good to have wishes. Sometimes they fulfill themselves, but not necessarily automatically. And I think everyone who does not believe in miracles, on the other hand, is also not a myth, is also not a realist. In that sense, I think we have to tackle this from two sides. One side definitely is the consumer. In that regard, Harald certainly has a point when it comes to self-constraint on consumer consumption. which is a process, I think, that hasn't really kickstarted to the extent where we can impose measures on the individual overextend until we have not designed something more appropriate on a governance level. But that's my personal perspective. Natalia, you are much more into this discussion also from a FAO UN perspective. What is your take on this?
Yes, definitely setting indicators, targets, metrics is never easy, especially in a intergovernmental setting, because of course each country has its own realities, its own capacities, its own objectives, so it's not easy to reach an agreement. And that's why soil, actually there is an indicator on soil. There is soil organic carbon under 15.3.1, but the issue is that there are tiers also, no? Depending on how much data you have, you can go for a very detailed analysis and reporting, or you can just take global data sets. And what many countries are doing is just taking those global data sets and not looking for national data. So what we are trying to do is to promote the development, collection, and reporting with national data and fresh data particularly. But yes, it's not easy. But we think it's important, it's key. Otherwise, if you don't have quantitative data that demonstrate that you are doing any change, no one will believe it, and no one will take ownership of the change also. So that's why we are now establishing, and I was nodding because actually, yes, we are very busy now trying to set indicators for the new action framework of the GSP. We have agreed to define targets and indicators. Apart from these 50% of global soils, we have included concrete targets for the different 6 action areas, and now we are developing indicators to measure the impact that the Global Soil Partnership, but also any other actions that countries are taking to improve soil health, to measure and quantify and demonstrate. Because as I said before, data is key. If you really want to make a change, if you want to demonstrate, you have to measure. You have to measure how was the status before and where are you now. And just coming back to, because I think this relates quite well with the previous questions from Harald regarding, for example, strengthen. I think Francis is already here.
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. So I will pass the floor to him and then we can continue the conversation later on.
Natalia, you finish your sentence and then we go to Francis.
Okay. Well, just because it's a new question. So regarding, shall we put more strengthened norms or regulations to, for example, to prevent the consumption of meat? I think this is quite challenging because it also includes cultural aspects that we have to take into account. So, but I think we can have a better discussion later on this because I'm sure Francis also have some insights for that.
Okay, great. Francis, can you speak up and provide your presentation? Working. And this is a pity, of course. Then Natalia, you have the chance to answer this first question of mine.
Okay. Yeah, well, actually, it implies cultural aspects. So I'm not sure that I'm not sure how easy can be to introduce a regulation from a government to change cultural aspects and consumption patterns in the society. I think it has to start with a very strong advocacy, awareness raising, educating the people, even from the schools, to make this change happen. You cannot just impose a norm and say you cannot eat meat anymore whenever you were used to eat every day. So I think it really is a process and it has to be accompanied by education and awareness.
Maybe, thank you, Natalia. It's really a pity that we cannot hear Francis. We have left about 10 minutes for our discussion. So maybe if people from the audience would like to join our discussion with regard to the first question of the need of international agreed targets and the reporting obligation, is there anybody who wants to step into this discussion? What?
If you would be interested in participating and bringing across your question or comment, please use the raise your hand function so that I can unmute you accordingly.
I see an interesting question regarding soil justice. I don't know if you have already addressed that one.
No, you're right. There is a question. What are the possibility? Maybe we can try again with Gabriela if you would like to again raise your hand and we can unmute you. Because I think we figured the technical problem we had before. Then you can interact with us.
So maybe we can go back to this question of soil justice, Natalia. Maybe you can say a few words on that.
Yes, well, including soil or environmental justice in any legislation is key. Particularly, well, when we are talking about soil, we cannot forget about land tenure, for example. If you don't have the right on that land, you cannot make any change. So I think it's the same principle here that has to be included in any principle, guiding principles, whenever we want to protect and conserve soils. The right to have access to soils. I see Francis managed to have the microphone.
We could hear. Okay. Okay.
Francis, we can hear you. This is great.
You can hear me. Okay, that's great. That's great. Thank you very much. Sorry.
The presentation, please. That would be
So my presentation, the title of my presentation is Source International Cooperation and Food Security. Can we have the next page? The next slide, please. My presentation outline is this: Introduction, African Soil Partnership, Soil Fertility and Land Degradation in Sub-Saharan Africa, and then climate change and food production and the way forward. Next, please. So you can see all these negatives. That is what we have in the African continent. We have poor and depleted resources, crop failure, no green revolution, civil strife, and others. Next slide, please. So we have over 200 million people. About 23% of the population are hungry. 40% of children under the age of 5 are malnourished. On the present trend, only 13% of food need will be met by 2050. 3.3% of agricultural GDP loss every year. Only 4% of cultivated land is irrigated. And per capita arable land fell by about 76 meters squared per year. Next, please. So let me talk a little about the African Soil Partnership. The African Soil Partnership was established in February 2013. It is composed of the sub-Saharan countries. African Soil Partnership is a partnership where the sub-regional soil issues are discussed and addressed by multiple stakeholders. It is an interactive consultative process with national soil entities like Soil Science Society and others to discuss and promote issues related to sustainable soil management and use of soil as natural resource. Next, please. Let's talk about soil fertility and land degradation in sub-Saharan Africa. Soil fertility still remains the fundamental biophysical cause for the declining per capita food production in the sub-region for the past 3 decades. This is evident from huge gap between actual yields and potential crop yields. During the past 30 years, soil fertility decline has been estimated at an average of 600 kilogram nitrogen per hectare, 75 kilogram phosphorus per hectare, and 450 kilograms potassium from over 200 million hectares. Next page, please. Next slide. So you can see from this slide that macronutrient application versus loss in sub-Saharan Africa is, you see that we lose more nutrients than we apply the nutrients. So we have a negative nutrient balance in our farming systems. Next, please. And then this shows the graph comparing on farm, that is what most farmers get, less than 1 ton per hectare, with the research station, what the research station get, and then the commercial people. So you see that there is a very huge yield gap in our farming systems. Next, please. Next slide, please. Aha. So these are pictures of the level of land degradation in Africa. It's all over. Next, please. And then climate change effects. When you see the changing weather, the climate, and the drought, these are some of the pictures that we see. Next, please. So let me talk a little about the climate change and food production. Climate is another challenge faced by millions of poor farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. Frequent severe drought, especially in the dry, semi-arid Sahel region, rising sea levels leading to flooding. Next slide, please. How has the sub-region been adjusting to climate change? The first is we delayed planting. Second one is shifting into more drought-tolerant crops. Third, shifting the composition of livestock between large animals, that is cattle, and smaller ruminants that better tolerate heat. And then investment in water harvesting and better water management techniques. Next, please. Technological innovations, the development of drought and flood-tolerant crops, development of crops with better water use efficiency, increased reliance on biological nitrogen fixation, incorporation of organic matter, use of conservation tillage. These are some of the technologies that we apply. Next, please. What policy interventions? Support of farmers to purchase crop insurance. That is very, very important. Then price stabilization for the produce, both the inputs and outputs, and then strategic grain reserves, use of market hedging instruments. Next, please. What are the constraints to climate change adaptation? Lack of access to information on weather, lack of predictive information on climate change and expected impact, lack of information on appropriate adaptation methods, cost of adjustment to adaptation, and the lack of access to credit by smallholder farmers makes them more vulnerable to impacts of climate change. Next, please. And you can see this picture, what the yellow, the yellow corn is normally what most farmers get, but with improved technology, good management, water, then you get the greener crops. Thank you. Next, please. So what consensus on soil-related strategies for increasing food supply. We have to avoid productivity losses due to soil degradation and restore productivity to soils that have degraded, restore nutrients and organic inputs, close the yield gap, enhance stock of carbon, and then increase the efficiency of irrigation, fertilizer, and pesticide use in farming systems. Others are soil erosion control, nutrient balancing, and sustainable soil management. Next, please. Then the way forward. We have to disseminate information on knowledge on soils and emphasize the importance of sustainable soil management to avoid impairing key soil functions, incorporate the principles and practices of sustainable soil management into policy guidance and legislation at all levels of government, leading to the development of a national soil policy. Governments should be assisted or on request to establish appropriate legislation, instruments, and processes to enable them to implement and monitor appropriate sustainable soil management practices. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Many thanks, Franzens, for this overview. and the clear way forward. Natalia, when you look at the last slide, do you agree or do you not agree to this slide? Or do we have something to emphasize, which is the most important mechanism to improve soil quality?
I definitely agree, and it is the way to enhance soil quality, soil health, is to work together to improve capacities and to address technical difficulties, for example, that they can have in labs, but also technical capacities in extension services and at the governmental level. So I cannot be more in agreement with Francis.
It sounds good. This is a good, actually, it's also a very good conclusion for our session and for our conference today. I have the honor to say thank you to all the presenters, to say thank you to the audience who has been with us, to also thank the people which are not so visible but made this conference possible. For example, Larissa, Charlotte, and maybe others here of the team of my colleague here, Oliver Ruppel. And of course, I want to thank also the organizing partners for all the work which has been necessary to make this conference possible. And with that, I wish you all a nice afternoon from our perspective, evening, morning, whatever, wherever you be. And I pass it over for the last words to Oliver.
Thank you, Harald. I hear Francis is laughing, and I agree with him. It is a joyful moment that we conclude this hybrid online event, hybrid in a very small space here in Austria, but online with people from around the world, such as Zambia and China and Ghana and Romania and many other people in the chat and online connected here around the element of soil, which is our united interest, and we trust that this will be another starting point together with our partners, the United Nations Environment Programme, together with the FAO, together with the social natural sciences from the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences, from our colleagues from the law department at such university, from the German Environment Agency, from the African Soil Partnership, from the FAO. In that regard, we will remain connected. We will remain active. We have a number of new projects rolled out and planned on the way ahead. And in this light, I would currently like to thank everyone who has contributed, to all the presenters who put their heads together, to the community in the chat that have engaged with us. Perhaps there will be another time when we will be able to have more people around the table. We initially wanted to meet in Vienna with more people, but we decided to take this online for various reasons. This will not be the last forum to discuss international soil law and governance. This will not be the last opportunity to make an improvement to soil in the context of multiple crises. It will hopefully be a step towards more food security, more human security, and to promote soil as an element that we as human beings are reliant on for our survival. I thank you very much around the globe, to Vienna, to Rome, to Accra, to Lusaka, to Wuhan,